Sergo, if you like what we're doing here, if you support the show and you want to give support to the show, you can do so by going to patreon.com/Let's Talk Native. And if you do so, we'll provide you some exclusive content and some things that others aren't going to get when you get it. So support us by going to Patreon. Yahweh.
Let's Talk Native is produced at the LTN Studios on the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. We break all the rules for Native media by peeling back the layers of assimilation and indoctrination. No prayers, no buffalo speeches, and no spirituality shows. While this podcast does not provide a path to spiritual enlightenment, we do take a tough look at history, oppression, and our survival. But the real goal here is to bring our people together by breaking down what separates us. So, welcome to Let's Talk Native with John Kane.
Sergo, and thanks for joining me. My guest today is Skyler Williams. Once again, checking in with us. We haven't checked in with him for a while. We are in the new year, and right now, 1492 Landback Lane is at day 169. So welcome back to the program, Skyler. It's good to have you join me.
Oh, no problem, John. Glad to be here.
All right. I guess just to recap, or before we recap, why don't you give for people who may be joining us for the first time, give a brief overview as to what day 169 of what?
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is 169 days of our trying to be, at every opportunity anyways, to be a peaceful occupation of our traditional territory. And so we moved in here on July 19th of 2020 and set up our camp. And until August 5th, when the cops came in, shooting and tasering and dragging people away from our lands. And there was a huge swell of support from our community and others that came out to make sure that we were able to maintain our presence there on the land. And so after that, we tried to do whatever we could to de-escalate the situation. We brought down the barricades, opened up the roads, and tried to let the politicians take over to let that run its course. And the politicians took a very hands-off approach to all of it, and they didn't deal with anything, and it was left to the OPP once again to come and enforce an injunction against the peaceful folks like myself on the land there, and tried to make some arrests, and again started shooting and tasering and trying to drag Ongahone people, Haudenosaunee people off our lands. And so after that, after the last time, there was some heavy equipment that got involved in the situation and seen roads dug up, a highway dug up, railways dug up to ensure the safety of the people on the ground there. The OPP presence is always at a absolute crazy number, and so when they've kind of pushed to get the situation to where it's at today, it's quite frustrating for myself and as well as many other people from our community and not just here but everywhere. And so I think this is kind of the typical stance that Canada and certainly Ontario in this situation has taken, is to let the police in the area deal with land claims.
Well, and again, just to big picture here. 1492 Landback Lane is an occupation that you guys established in opposition to a development on what's been considered somewhat of a neutral area around the Six Nations Reserve territory, Oswego. An area that is clearly within a land claims disputed land claims issue, and again, coming out of all of the conflict out of Caledonia and all of that, this was another push by developers, by the province of Ontario to to creep in with their suburban sprawl onto native lands, and this lies at the foundation of the conflict.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and everybody remembers 2006 and what happened there. So this particular development of 1,400 homes, it rolls up right directly across the road from Gunastado, which was the former Douglas Creek Estates. It is directly across the road from that. Like for myself, that was a year. Lived there for a year and then spent 7 months in jail for that stand. And 7 months in jail just to have all my charges dropped afterwards. And so like this is how Canada and certainly Ontario has dealt with land claims, by putting our people in jail, by burying us under the weight of like heavy bail and release conditions to force the agenda that they of that disposition that we've been fighting against since forever.
Now it's interesting. I saw on your Facebook page somebody had posted a little video of a woman known as Zitkala Sa, Gertrude Simmons Bonin, I think is what her name was. And they talked about her being an activist, and it all sounds good. But then when you get to the point where, and she was Lakota, it gets to the point where it talks about all the good work and how her work led to the Indian Reorganization Act and the Indian Citizenship Act. And so I get to a place where I got a question. When does our activism turn into a more polished assimilation program for the U.S. and Canada? And the Indian Act obviously comes to mind. And when I look at some of those who are advocating and supporting the way Canada is addressing, let's say, the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which their approach, like the United States and so many other places, is a watered down approach to something that, again, has no teeth. It is the minimum standard for what the international community is saying nation states like Canada, like the United States, are supposed to abide by when it comes to Indigenous rights. And I use these words, and I know some of them are problematic. But when I think about what you guys are going through, and the idea that the Canadian government, the provincial government, is deferring this down to what they're calling rule of law, which is their rules of law that have no consent by our people. And keeping in mind that the language of the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is about free, prior, and informed consent, not consultation. And that's what I'm starting to hear on the U.S. side with this nomination of Deborah Haaland, a native person from New Mexico, as head of the Interior Department. So when I see all this stuff, and I've got to ask you, I mean, at what point do you see some of the problem being the way Native voices are being represented to the Canadian government?
Well, I mean, like, this is the thing, like, and you highlighted a bit of those things, like the talk around rule of law and all of that kind of, sorry, and excuse my language.
Don't worry about it.
It is absolute bullshit. When you can sit here and talk about the rule of law when in every, in Canada here, like, the rule of law stuff has been talked about till it's blue in the face in the Supreme Court about how it is absolutely not representative of the Indigenous folks here in this country, at least. And the UNDRIP stuff, if you want, like, the UN Declaration is something that, like, is, how can you even talk about that? It is absolutely infuriating to be talking about something as the Declaration on Indigenous Rights stuff for like it's absolutely ridiculous and infuriating for so many people. And like, and that's the thing, is the rule of law must pertain to everyone, like of everyone.
Yeah.
And like, this is, and like, whose laws are we talking about here? Like, we're talking about people that have been here for centuries before European contact, and this is like, we've had our own laws. We've got those, and so for them to come in and try and enforce their law on our lands, like, this is something that's absolutely infuriating. And again, like, I understand, like, not everybody still has their hereditary councils, but like, we do. You know, and we still have those systems of government. We still have those means of governing ourselves without having to have the police and with their guns and their jails and their courts with their orders. Like, this isn't, like, it's absolutely ridiculous and infuriating. And sorry for getting upset about that one, but it's like,
that's the conversation we need to have. Look,
like, this is like, it is absolutely disrespectful to the nth degree when you hear countries talk about signing on to a declaration for the indigenous rights of indigenous people when we're sitting here peacefully occupying our traditional territory and we've got guns drawn on us. Like, this is absolutely ridiculous.
Well, and their foundation of rule of law still goes back to the doctrine of Christian discovery, which clearly should have been repudiated, and even the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples repudiates it. But there's nothing in place that holds any of these nations accountable to make sure that the foundation of their laws has been redirected. I mean, when you consider the racist foundation that is tied to the Declaration or the Doctrine of Christian Discovery, there's no way that Native people or frankly any marginalized people are ever going to, that are not white and Christian are going to have any kind of equal application of this law. And again, when they say rule of law, they're ignoring natural law. They're ignoring, so much of this stuff, and they're talking about laws written by white men that were specifically designed for expansionism in the United States and Canada. So I agree with you, but I guess what it gets back to is to the same. I guess my question was, when we look at the role that so-called native leadership, let's be honest. I mean, there were a lot of native people involved in that UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And there's a lot of native people who are still trying to advocate ways that native people can be governed under the Indian Act. And this is part of the problem. And I see the same thing on the US side. And again, I hear people singing the praises of the fact that that a native person is going to be a part of the Biden cabinet and is going to head up the Interior Department. And it's almost like we're not even understanding. We lost a native person to that system. That's what it comes down to for me. These people are not working for us. They are not our voices. And unless they can hear our voices and make sure that the voices that they do hear are properly being addressed by these colonial powers, then they are just tools of oppression. To the point of the earliest part of your conversation, you guys are trying to establish a process where this thing gets resolved somewhat diplomatically, but so it's a political solution. And they keep trying to make this about it being their laws being violated, laws that never take us into consideration, and laws that are unjust at its again at its foundation. So this is part of the problem. And when you consider the fact that you guys are trying to be peaceful and you're trying to work out systems that can somewhat accommodate a coexistence, they want to come in with rubber bullets and tear gas and these kinds of things. I mean, it's absurd. What happens is you end up having a disproportionate amount of momentum on one side, and by that I mean this is associated with pipelines. This is associated with this kind of development. Look, you get these developers who get millions and millions of dollars. They get this piecemeal approach to environmental releases, and they get all of these things lined up. And so the way the Crown or the way the U.S. courts, the way they view us is that we're the disrupting ones, that we're the ones that are inconveniencing them. They don't ever consider the fact that look, the only, and I saw this thing posted on I think on a couple of pages, including yours, the only reparations for land claims is land. And these guys think that they can just pay something off, or they can, sway, perhaps a native politician, one way or the other. And they don't address the fact that we're looking at this in terms of not just 7 generations, but all the generations leading up that get to there. And that we do have to have you can't just look at their return on investment as tipping the scales of their justice system.
Well, and I think that's a big part of this nation-to-nation relationship now for the last, that's the Indigenous people in Canada here come out in the biggest way ever. Like there's never been a huge engagement with Canadian politics until Trudeau started talking about this nation-to-nation relationship building and all this, happy Indian stuff that he wants to talk about. And here we are again with the same issues over and over and over again. We're dealing with jails and violent action by police.
Well, and the problem is when they talk about nation to nation, they are really talking about the municipalization of native territories, their system of federalism, and the same thing gets said on the U.S. side, like somehow native governments are fit into that scale of nation, provincial, maybe municipal governments, and so they aren't recognizing us as distinct peoples. They are trying to figure, and they're trying to lure our own people into that process so that they can give their full faith and credit to a court system that is bound by Canadian law, not by laws that we hold that predate Canada or the United States. So we get into this debate about what it means to have government to government, because they don't really say nation to nation. Now they talk about government to government because they want to cast us as a lesser sovereign than them and as a lesser, a figure within their system of federalism.
And so, and the imposition of band council elected systems in our communities, to see hereditary chiefs and clan mothers here in Six Nations jailed for simply practicing that governing system that has been in place for 1,000 years at least. And so we want to talk about the criminalization of people. It started on day one with this band council stuff.
Well, and it goes beyond the band council stuff, because then you end up with their so-called tribal police, these police systems that are enforcing Canadian law, or on the U.S. side, U.S. law or state law or provincial law. So we end up with people who look like us, except for the uniforms that they're wearing, and they end up being agents of oppression.
Absolutely, they are. And I mean, we're actually pretty lucky here at Six Nations right now. The Six Nations police have taken a very hands-off approach to all of it and are not getting involved and have said as much. And so so that's at least a good thing for us.
Yeah, and I agree. When I do see that, that is a good note. The problem is that I also sometimes see an attempt by law enforcement, whether it's OPP or whether it's SQ or whether it's band council police or whatever else, where there's also this effort to always try to cast us as somehow criminal beyond these things. So, whether it's the cannabis laws or whatever the case may be, there's always an effort to try to cast us as being, again, outside of, operating within their rule of law.
So far, the elected band council here in Six Nations has not come out supportive, but also not come out to denounce us either. The elected council here in 2018 had signed an accommodation deal to accept this development, but at the same time, and I don't want to say that I've defended them, but I guess I don't know how else it could be taken, because they have like that's the thing, is they're not giving a whole lot of choice in the matter. And so when the developer in this case showed up to town with a bag full of money and said, like, either you take this money and development can go on, or you say no to the money and development's still going to happen.
Yeah.
So like that's
the offer you can't refuse, so to speak. Yeah.
This is it, right? And so one way or another, that development was still going to proceed. Whether or not band council got anything to do with it or not is, whatever. But, and so so yeah, I don't got a lot of blame, at least not in this circumstance, for the band council anyway. I've got a lot of blame for them in other reasons, but not for this one.
No, and I hear you. And I'm sure there are some that agree with you, but I'm also sure there are some who are saying no. Taking the money essentially, makes you more complicit. So I understand there's probably two different ways to interpret that, but I do agree that. But I mean, the problem is when these
thing though is they've used and weaponized like starvation to force people into colonial roles to feed their families. And these are roles that these INAC councils, etc., that are Indian agents of today. Yeah. Right? And so, like, it's either you want to feed your family.
No, I get it. I get it.
I mean, I don't, but
no, I understand the circumstances, because their very existence is tied to complicity, and so it makes it really difficult for any of us to look at those elected councils as anything but servants of the Canadian or U.S. masters. I mean, it's hard to look at them. I'm not saying they don't ever do any good work, and I'm not suggesting that. And it'd be one thing if they were simply administering funds, but they aren't. What they're administering is Canada's version of the rule of law.
Absolutely, and I think and I think we've tried very diligently to make sure that, and we. Fought in our civil case, the injunction proceeding is against that I was the sole named defendant in. When we tried to argue our case in that, we were barred from being able to participate because we weren't going to leave the land regardless of what that court said.
Well, which is, again, gets down to their ways of manipulating their so-called rule of law. Instead of legitimately hearing the discussion and hearing the arguments, they use their technicalities to say, no, we're not even going to consider what the arguments are. And so, I mean, it defeats their argument about their so-called rule of law when they use that law to basically just lock people up, hold them in contempt of court, and then in holding them of contempt of court, saying because they are in contempt of this court, we don't have to hear their arguments.
Absolutely, and I mean, like this is what the court hung their hat on when hearing ours, was that they weren't going to hear a bit of that, because they knew that regardless of what this court said, and I said that as well in kind of my opening line there, was that that in order for me to respect and my law, that I have an obligation to do what I'm doing. And right. So there's nothing this court can do or these cops can do. There's nothing, there's jails that they can do to deter us. Like, if it isn't me, it's going to be somebody else. If it isn't somebody else, it's going to be somebody else. Like, it's like like these aren't going to stop. Yeah. Not just here, but across Canada, across the U.S. until those governments start to respect the fact that we are nations unto ourselves.
Well, and the crazy part with a lot of this stuff, and we're going to take a break here in just a minute, but as we go to this break, one of the things that concerns me is that this isn't anything new. The whole idea of treaty making that Canada has, still wants to, suggest is something that is the legitimate process. There was never an attempt to find out whether the X's on their agreements had the legitimate authority to cede land or to receive funds. They don't, as long as they had somebody that they could check the box for. They didn't. We have to make sure that when we're dealing with them, that they have the right authority, they have proper authority, and most of the time they don't, because they aren't representing the crown. They're representing, a provincial agency or something like that. So there's already, the foundation, the historical foundation that shows that they've always tried to find, weak links within our people, weak links within our systems to try to impose something on all of us, just because they've gotten a few people to agree with them. So, and I think this is a problem. Look, Skyler, we're going to take just a brief break, and then we're going to come right back. I usually try to break the show up into 2 segments. So hang with me, and we'll take a break, and we'll be right back. This is John Kane with Skyler Williams from 1492 Landback Lane in Six Nations, and we'll be right back after this. So thanks for coming back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native, and my guest is Skyler Williams from 1492 Landback Lane, the occupation of disputed land on the edge of the Six Nations Reserve, Oswego, in what some people call Ontario. So we'll just leave it at that. Skyler, I want to, again, thank you for joining me and giving us an update. Look, this is my first show of the new year as per the Gregorian calendar. So tell me this. I mean, as you guys have completed, or as you're completing 169 days on this standoff, essentially, what do you see going forward into the new year? Do you have any upsides? I mean, anything that you're feeling optimistic about?
You know what? There's lots that I'm feeling optimistic about. You know what? Like, there's the Confederacy Council here in Six Nations has come out in a big way to say that they support. There's the Band Council. Say about 3/4 of them that have stated that they support. Not coming out publicly and saying anything, but doing what they can within their means to be able to say as much as they can
as individuals. Yeah, sure.
Yes, as individuals, yeah. And so, like, I really look forward to seeing where that can go. And and I think something that we've been talking about since the very start of all this is all of this peace and doing whatever we can to maintain that peace and striving towards unity for our community, and because that's the thing, right? Is like, Canada and Ontario, these governments, these police, the RCMP before the OPP, the Brits before that, have all looked for cracks in our communities to drive our communities, to drive these wedges home in our communities. And I think that's something that our community, like every other community across, not just Canada, but the U.S. as well, with the tribal folks, have divided us so incredibly well. And so it's on us now for this generation and for all the generations coming, to be able to bring those people back into the fold, to make sure that everybody is going to be accounted for in this. Because that's the thing, is whenever these things happen, there's always somebody that stands up and says, well, you don't speak for me, or we're this family and that doesn't account for us. And so when we started this, we said that this was going to be for everybody, regardless of family or faction. It doesn't matter, because we're going to argue about that until we're blue in the face, and we're going to argue about that for the next 50 years over who has say in this. But if we don't make a stand and make the stand that we are, and we don't come together as nations, like, we're not going to have anything left to argue over.
Well,
And
you've
so I
also
think
you
no, go ahead, please.
you've also got to be pretty optimistic about the level of support that you're receiving from other Native communities, other Native territories. I know that you guys are have been, a conversation on either side of that imaginary line, and you are being looked at as again one of the examples that people are trying to establish for how they go forward in these kind of adverse situations. So, I mean, talk to me a little bit about the outpouring of support that you're getting from outside your community.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and we've had folks from all the way out west, all the way out east. There's been folks from the States come out. Yeah, no, we've had, there's a Kitagan up in north of Ottawa that folks from there were out. Like, it's been just a huge outpouring of support from the Wet'suwet'en to, some Cree folks from Manitoba had come out, like, and all of them with like some backing or support or from their nation to come here as ambassadors of their respective nations. And so, like, that it's an amazing thing to see folks come out to support the legal defense fund the way they have, the camp, and being able to push things forward there. Like, right now we've got 8 tiny homes that folks are living at the site down there that people have been utilizing over the winter months here. Wood stoves, and trying to make sure that people are able to maintain our occupation throughout these next few cold months that we have ahead of us here.
Well, I've even heard solidarity coming from the Mi'kmaq fishermen that are
Absolutely
involved in their own. I'm surprised you guys haven't got lobster yet. Hint, hint.
Yeah, this is it. Yeah.
But no, I mean, and of course, the Landback movement is, and it's great that you guys have incorporated that in what you're doing there. But the Landback movement is obviously something that has been a push. I mean, it gained a lot of recognition when, the U.S. President Trump was trying to use Mount Rushmore as a backdrop when he was running, doing his campaign. And so, this idea that many of us are putting, so much singular attention to the value of land, because look, it's kind of what defines us, right? I mean, our very names are tied to the lands that we come from. So, I mean, it really, I think that's the positive part of all of this, is that we are seeing such solidarity across Native territories. Of course, the risk is always that we're going to see some of these people that undermine some of that, and so when I'm not trying to make this into a hate session towards some of the iconic Native leaders who get out there and get a lot of press, but look, we're going to see it. That's what concerns me on the U.S. side with this nomination for the Interior Department. I've seen some of these names who on the Canadian side that get a lot of attention, but they always seem to to never go far enough. I mean, and one of the things that comes to mind, I think about Murray Sinclair after the investigation and this whole conference on residential schools. He characterized residential schools as cultural genocide. And it's like, why did you stick the word culture in front of it? I mean, you're talking about children who died. This wasn't about stripping just of culture. And so there's always this, even when we have these voices that get out there, they never quite are prepared to take the solid bite that they need to take into these things.
Well, you know what? Like, a lot of it's just that the politics stuff around this is just it really is a popularity contest, and it is something I try to stay away from as much as I possibly can, or I would end up just pissed off all the time. And so I do my very best not to look as much of it as I can. But absolutely, when we're talking about residential school, when we're talking about missing and murdered Indigenous women, when we're talking about the over incarceration of Indigenous people across the board, like, this is something that, like, I don't see how it could be anything other than that genocide. And this and all of this stuff in the now, like this isn't stuff we're talking about 100 years ago or 50 years ago or 20 years ago. This is stuff that's continuing to happen. And these are things that are very documentable ways in which the governments, the courts, the cops are doing all of these things in very, very obvious ways to be able to silence those voices that are coming out.
Well, and this is where we get into this conversation about racism being systemic. I mean, it's demonstrating itself even in the midst of this global pandemic. Native people are not only seeing infection rates, but death due to COVID-19 at higher rates. You know, and it's not just down in Navajo territory. Navajo territory is where the numbers are scary because it's a large population of Native people. So the total numbers are pretty high. But if you do it as a percentage of population, we're seeing Native people here in Seneca Nation territory, where I do my show from. The number of people who are infected and who've died as a percentage of the population, it's pretty damn high, and we're seeing it in territory after territory after territory. And I don't know, we don't get into a lot of the COVID-19 conversations, you know, cross border. But give me your assessment. How is your community holding up in the midst of this?
Well, February and March. We at Six Nations, there's a highway that is now blocked, but we blocked it in February and March for when they raided Wet'suwet'en, and then again in Tyendinaga they raided them on the tracks there, and so we blocked that highway then. And right following that, our community went into a full lockdown. The Band Council and the Confederacy worked together to be able to put barricades up all around the community to make sure that our community was going to stay safe from this. And so, trust me when I say nobody takes the COVID stuff more seriously than our community. And so now in this midst of this second wave that we're hitting here in Ontario, like it is, you know, it's certainly a concern for a lot of people, and we want to make sure that, you know, we're doing all the things like when, you know, ally folks want to come out and support in different ways. We're making sure that we're doing a lot of the precautions to make sure that they're not bringing COVID blankets down.
Well, and Doug Ford raised hell when you guys were trying to lock down your communities because of COVID. If I recall, he was raising hell.
Well, I mean, since you brought up Doug Ford, this is a guy that, like, the province had started the Places to Grow Act, which was a bit of legislation that's seen financial incentives for massive corporations to develop along an area of land. And so if you take that map that they have for their Places to Grow Act and you lay that directly over top of the Grand River Tract, it is almost exactly over just the Grand River. And so, like, to see these developers come into these contested lands in the way that they are isn't just a happenstance that this developer came here. He's being given incentive to come here.
Well, and it gets back to what I mentioned earlier. Then you get this disproportionate amount of investment and momentum that it is geared towards encroaching on our lands. And so when they go into their courts of law, they can say, "Well, look at how the scales are tilted. You know, they've millions of dollars. We've got jobs at stake. We've got all these things. But it's all been part of a plan to basically encroach on our lands in the first place."
This is it. And I mean, this is the same premier who, after the elected council chief here, had his house burned down, and the premier stood up in a press conference and said, like, these are a bunch of bad apples that have taken over the land at Landback Lane, and the chief said something that they didn't like, and they went and burned his house down. Like, there was, and this is the thing, is this is the rhetoric that these politicians are putting out that inflame the situation to the degree that it is, that help to perpetuate those divisions and again, like, it's not just here that these divisions exist. Like this band council elected system stuff has created this massive system of haves and have-nots in all of these communities across the country, across the continent.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's infuriating to so many to see a politician stand up in a press conference and talk about something that he knows absolutely nothing about.
Well, and those comments are always loaded with racism. I remember going back to the blockades in Tandanaga over Wet'suwet'en, and the comments were, while some people have to work, some people have to go to school, making it sound like we're just a bunch of lazy people who don't have jobs and that we're not interested in advancing ourselves. So a lot of these comments that are coming from all different segments of Canadian, politicians and governance, these are the comments that are being said in their Canadian Parliament halls. I mean, so yeah, there's very little question, and of course we get back again to this idea that when you look at the disproportionate amount of Native people who are killed by cops, who are serving prison time, who are the disproportionate number of women who turn up missing or murdered, and of course even in a system that is applauded on the United States side when it comes to healthcare, we know that our people are drinking unsafe water. Our people are disproportionately made ill because of colonialization.
Absolutely, and here in Six Nations, we've had a boil water advisory for the public drinking water for 25 years.
I mean, that's absurd.
The most populous reserve in the whole continent.
Yeah, it's absurd. It's absurd.
Absolutely ridiculous that we've got to boil our water before we can use it to wash with.
And now people talk about Flint, Michigan on the U.S. side, but totally ignore the fact that you guys are living in an unsafe water condition and have been for a quarter of a decade. I mean, it is absurd. And of course, this is where our territories that on one hand may benefit somewhat economically by having a non-native population that's close to us when it comes to things like trade and commerce. It also becomes problematic because, again, this overlay that you're talking about of these development parks and these industrial parks that they want to put on our territories. They start looking at our lands as the sacrifice zones because of perhaps our population isn't quite as dense as theirs. And so if you're going to run a pipeline someplace, well, run it through native territory. If you want to do an industrial park, well, do it where it'll have the least per capita impact. And so you do it on or about or near native territories.
Well, and I've talked about this a million times, is this idea that covering everything in concrete and asphalt in the name of progress. Well, this isn't what progress looks like for Native communities. Progress for us is being able to build and live in a way that lets the deer and the foxes and the birds have a place for their habitat. You go to any Native community, I don't care where you are, there's the amount of space that we take up for our homes and for agriculture are very, very small. Like, you come here to Six Nations, you look down from Google Earth there at Six Nations, and you will see this green spot in the middle of Southern Ontario. And you got to remember, Southern Ontario, a quarter of an entire country lives in Southern Ontario. A quarter of the entire country lives in this area. And so when we're talking about the cost of what this land is here, like, this is the most lucrative bit of real estate anywhere. And so, like, to quantify that with a dollar figure is absolutely ridiculous. And so for us to be able to, there's all of these issues that, we could talk for another 10 hours about, what the cost of this is, what racism looks like all of this. But for governments to respect the fact that this is a nation of people. Like, this isn't just this isn't a municipality. This isn't another cog in the wheel of Canada. We are a nation unto ourselves, and that needs to be respected. And we're going to keep coming to these situations over and over and over again. The more that this line of disrespect is is perpetuated by these governments.
Well, and you bring up a good point, and I think, to put a finer point on it. Look, as much as I support Black Lives Matter, or I will support any oppressed people in the U.S. or on the Canadian side, there is something that's distinct about us. We aren't just a Native community that that has to worry about gentrification that the Black communities in the U.S. have experienced, or any other marginalized people. We are a distinct people. We didn't come to the U.S. or Canada seeking the U.S. or the Canadian dream, the American dream. We didn't come here because we were escaping oppression from a country that we decided we weren't going to fight it there. We're gonna try a new start in a virgin land. No, the only reason it was a virgin land is because we were occupying it. And we kept it in that condition. So, I mean, there's this perception that Canada gets, this unwarranted perception that they are so green and that they are so nice, and that the human rights stance is so much better than other countries, and it's all a lie. And if you look even at the 10,000 foot level at what the Native experience has been in Canada, and the amount of oppression that our people have experienced, even as we're defending land, as we're defending green space, as we're defending the climate and the environment, we've experienced the same level of oppression, and in many ways even worse on the Canadian side than exists on the U.S. side.
Well, and you know what? Racism is something that I think, regardless of what race you are, like the racism is something that it's almost tolerable when it's something that's talked about behind closed doors. It's almost tolerable when it's systemic, when it's built into the system. But when that racism comes at the point of a barrel of a gun, when that racism is dragging Indigenous people off their lands, and like this is what racism looks like. Like for it to be fully in front of your face the way that it has been in the last several months since being at Landback Lane here, like this is, and having a court stand up and say, like, the people who are named in it can't even defend themselves because they're upholding those obligations to their own laws. Like, this is something that, like, I don't see how that can be anything but infuriating to an entire nation of people.
Well, and to be clear, there's racism and then there's genocide. Racism is about oppressing people. Racism is about viewing a people inferior to you. Genocide is about eliminating people. And genocide, this idea of denationalization, this what do they call it? Ethnic cleansing. That's what we're experiencing. We're experiencing all the racism that every other marginalized people are experiencing. Sometimes we're experiencing it in a weird way. I mean, think about the mascot issue and some of that stuff. But at its core, this effort for assimilation and encroachment on our territories, it's about making us no longer exist as distinct people. That's genocide. That's the definition of genocide. Creating policies that will cause the people to cease to exist. And as bad as racism is almost in a different class, and it's used in many different ways. It's used as a system of power, inequality. But when you talk about using racism and using, a people who just will not conform as justification for making us cease to exist. And look, there's plenty of politicians historically, both on U.S. and Canadian, on the Canadian side, who Trudeau's dad, right, who insisted that we needed to be eliminated, and that was the policy. And so, I mean, there's no way that Justin Trudeau has fallen that far from the tree here. I mean, and when you look at even the massaging of words and that kind of stuff, what it comes down to is they want us to be Americans. They want us to be Canadians, and they know as Canadians or Americans where we're going to fit in their social scale ladder, right there at the bottom. So rather than us standing up as distinct people, and them having to recognize us as distinct people, they want to recognize us at the bottom rungs of their social scale.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like, I touched on earlier the over incarceration of Indigenous people. Like we make up 3% of the population here in Canada, and you go to the prisons here, and we make up 25% of that.
And that's men and women. I mean, the Native women who are in Canadian prisons is alarming. I mean, it really is alarming.
It is 1/3 of the population in prison for women.
I mean, it's absurd.
That's appalling. That's how can that be anything other than systemic racism built into the system? To see the nations of people that were here first, that were here, that originated here, like that. How can that be anything but that?
Well, and that's why it's important that we talk about this stuff. So people have to know what these numbers are. They need to know what is lying at the foundation of 1492 Landback Lane. I appreciate you giving me so much of your time. I know it's tough because one of the things that's always a danger is the people who are looked to speak on behalf of a community are oftentimes targeted, and I know that you have been to some extent. So I know there's a risk. There's a risk in being as candid as you are and being as vocal as you are. So I appreciate that, and I'm not trying to put you on a hero's pedestal, but I understand the challenges that come with that, and of course I'm sure there are some things that as you get impassioned on these conversations and frankly you get pissed off, from a public standpoint, we got to walk back some of our comments sometimes, but it doesn't change how we feel about some of these things.
You know what? Absolutely. And this is the thing is like for too long now, like our people have been made to stay quiet in all of this. For too long, it's been, whether it be fear from residential school stuff and from the genocide that, my parents and my grandparents had to live through. For us to be able to say, at least to be able to give our children and our grandchildren an argument, we need to make these things. We have an obligation to be able to give them the opportunity to do this same thing. Because if we sit back and do nothing, trust me, I'm under no misconceptions that this is going to be the big win that's going to set everything straight, and all the Ungohoe communities across the country will suddenly be given all of their rights and recognition that they deserve. I don't. But what I do know is that these moments can be seized and capitalized on to at least be able to give our children and our grandchildren an argument so that they have a leg to stand on when it comes to when it's their turn.
Well, the bottom line is
they're making fun of them for not doing it quite the right way.
And our kids are going to have, we've got to answer to our kids when they ask us, what did we do?
This is it.
And we,
what did you do, Dad? What did you do for the land?
So whether we did everything, by somebody's estimation, 100% right or not, the point is that we drew a line in the sand and we defended it. And so again, I want to thank you and all of the support that you have there. And I want to continue to encourage those from other territories to support what you guys are doing there. I'll post a link on your GoFundMe page when we post the video. I appreciate what you're doing, and I want to thank you again for giving me so much of your time.
Oh, absolutely, John. I really appreciate all the help. I really, really want to say a big thank you to you. I mean, and again, to all of the support that we do get, it lifts us up in such a way that I don't even have the words for it.
Well, we'll check back in with you again. Give me a holler if anything comes up that needs immediate attention. But we'll check back in with you from time to time.
All right, now.
Oh, thank you too. All right, that's Skyler Williams from 1492 Landback Lane on the Six Nations Reserve in what some people call Ontario. Again, I thank Skyler for his good work and the work of all those who are there with him and that are supporting this resistance to, again, these are kind of luxury condos that they're trying to build on disputed land, right on the fringe of the Six Nations territory in Ontario. We'll check back with him from time to time. Look, I do want to thank you. This is our first program of the new calendar year, and we're gonna keep at it. We will not stop doing what we do here. So I want to thank you for listening. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native.
Used to push a black Impala with some tint. My note was almost more than half my rent. All my money went to one expense. I know that don't make no kind of sense. Back then I used to drive off Mason. Those cops not used to the faces. We got, they would run my plates and we stopped, but I just left work while I restocked. But they see my whip and they see pots on my outfit. They think treetop got a head full of steam like a teapot. Better do what he say or you get shot. Ooh, who are you? See you like red, must be a Paru. If you went to work, why bring the crew? What you think, black folks don't carpool? Better would have been a crib if my shirt turned blue. Keep your hands on the wheel, sir, 10 and 2. I stopped this car cause you did too, dog.